You're watching the free version of Mocha Essentials. Follow along with projects and footage with a premium download available at BorisFX.com. Hello and welcome to exercise 4, where we're going to be looking at some more tracking techniques for dealing with difficult types of footage. We're going to look at 3 different types of shots. One is to show a little technique we can do with the planar tracker when we have lots of reflections changing over on the screen. The next one is when we have something passing in front of where we're trying to track, so tracking occlusions. And the third one is where we track when something goes off screen and what we can do when we have a longer camera move, as we have in this shot here. Okay, but let's start off with our first shot and see how we get on with this one. So I'm going to apply Mocha and let's see what we've got. And let's play back and take a look at the shot. This is always the first thing that you should do when looking at tracking something. Just take a few moments to analyze what the shot's doing and identify any potential problems you might have here. Now, this screen is actually quite a tricky one to track for a number of different reasons. The first one is we have a curved edge to the screen. So that means that this area here is not completely co-planar, like where the screen curves around, obviously. This edge of the curve here is obviously more in keeping with the side than it is the front of the phone. So that's a little wrinkle we have to think about. And the other big one is we have a large number of reflections going across the phone as well. So we can see there, reflections are what is going to give this shot a lot of life, but it does make it very tricky to track. Let me show you what I mean here. If we just try to do what we would traditionally do, I'll just take a shape, an X-spline and X-spline rectangle and just put it around here, just going across the entire front of the phone. And obviously we're starting in the middle. We're starting where the shape is biggest and most clear and most front facing as well. Okay, and let's come over to our track motion options. We know this from the previous exercise that we are looking at a perspective change. And I'll set up my surface very quickly. Move that around there-ish. There we go. And just so we can see this, I'm going to come into my layer properties, go to my insert clip, and I think I'll use a grid, an 8x8 grid. So come back into the essentials and let's track that forwards. And it looks pretty good. I mean, there's a bit of slipping, but generally speaking, it looks pretty nice. So let's track it backwards. And this is also, relatively smooth, but there is a slight, there we go. When the reflection comes over here, you can see the grid begins to pull up. See that there? So when the reflection comes in, it starts to pull because we're tracking in, a bit too much information. So we're getting a lot of the reflections coming in there. Now, Mary's already shown you how to cut out this shape, how to add another shape to this layer to get rid of some of these reflections so that we're not tracking them. I'm going to come into my layer properties and turn my overlay off so we can see this a bit better. But I'm going to show you a different way of handling this that can often be faster and sometimes just more successful than adding more shapes to a bigger one. I'm actually just going to get rid of this layer. I'm not a big fan of this. So I'm just going to come into the little trash can here and delete the selected layer. Now let's create a new rectangle spline. I'm on the same starting point here and I'm going to create a smaller shape. So I'm going to create a shape just at the top of the phone. There we go. I'm not going to think too much about it. We're going to do this and then see what happens to it. And I'm going to try not to take in the curved edges as much as we can, and we'll see what that does. And what we're doing here is we're leveraging the fact that Mocha's tracker is a planar tracker. The tracking data that we get for the surface is going to be that planar shape, that planar movement. So it means we can extend that tracking data out for all co-planar elements. Okay, and to give it a bit more of an apples to apples comparison, I'm going to insert my 8x8 grid again, come back to the essentials, set this to perspective. And I'm going to track this backwards just with this small shape up at the top. And let's see what happens. Okay, so that doesn't look as successful. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. We're giving it a smaller shape to track. So any problems and any mistakes that it makes on tracking that shape are going to be amplified out across the rest of the plane. So that's why we're getting a bad result here. So let's see what happens if I add another shape to this. So I'm going to press and hold on my rectangular shape tool. And I can come down and I can choose what type of shape that I'm drawing. I can either do an X-spline or a Bezier spline, rectangle, or if we have the X with a plus next to it or the B with a plus next to it, then I can add a shape to the layer that I'm working on. So instead of creating up a new layer each time, we can add multiple shapes to a single layer. And let's see what happens if I just add in another rectangle to the bottom down here. So you can see now I've still only got one layer in my layers, which is the layer 2 that we had. And I'm going to retrack this and see what happens. And take a look at that. That is giving us a much more solid track than we had previously. If I track forwards now, and I'll play that back, we have a nice, consistent, and probably near perfect track created just with two small shapes rather than with one big one or with one small one. But just one final thing here. Note what I've done with the placement of the shapes. And I'm going to come up to View and I'm going to go to Mats and go to all mats there. And let's come back into Mats. And I could use the shortcut and show us the overlays here. And in my layer palette, I can come over and give these a better color so we can actually see them. When we're creating multiple shapes, what we want to do is we want to have shapes that cover that plane as much as possible. Instead of just having one shape just down at the bottom or one shape just up at the top or two shapes just at the top, because I've got good areas for tracking at the top and the bottom, this is going to give me the most consistent result for the large area that I'm trying to track in. I'm going to turn off the grid as well, set that back to none in layer properties. And I'm just going to hide that shape here because I want to show you another way of doing the same thing. I'm going to come into my tool again. Remember, I'm still in the X plus here. So I just want to go to the X, and all of our tools do this. So everyone has a little plus symbol right next to it if it adds to the layer rather than creates a new layer. That's all of the tools. There we go. But I'm going to create a new layer here because what I could do is I could come into the plus. I can add in just multiple small shapes that give me good and consistent tracking data. So let's see what happens when I try and track this one in. Let's do a similar thing to our surface here. Just quickly bring that into the right sort of area. There we go. And turn on the grid. Just makes it easier to see. When we visualize these things, it just makes everything a lot easier. And I'll track that forwards. And I'll track it backwards. And I don't expect this to be as successful. There we go. Yeah. Which is sort of not exactly what I was hoping for, but completely understandable. Because I've got these smaller areas, there's not as much room for error as we would, have with larger shapes. So you can see here, I've made this bottom right-hand corner shape quite big. In fact, a lot bigger than it needs to be. And then when the movement comes in of the glass coming in there, obviously Mocha doesn't know that that's a separate object. It thinks that that's something that it should be looking at, and it gets distracted. Goes, oh, there's a pretty glass in a red dress. Let's do that. So what I'm trying to say here is when we are using smaller shapes, is we do want to come in and actually be a bit more, careful with how much of excess we have around the edge. We have a lot less latitude for mistakes when we're dealing with smaller shapes. So you can see there, that's tracking in a lot nicer, and it's not getting as distracted when we're using small shapes that are actually accurate. And that's looking pretty good. I mean, maybe not as good as the one we had last time. I can see there's a little bit of breathing in the grid. If we have a look there, as the light goes through, there's a little bit of breathing. Sort of sucks up to the top left-hand corner, which isn't great, isn't what we want. So it's not as good as when we were working with that shape there, those two strips, but it still gives a better result than we had when we were tracking in the entire shape. And that's how we can use multiple shapes on a single layer to get better tracking. When we come back, we're going to be looking at how we can work with occlusions. So that's when objects pass in front of the area that you want to be tracking. So join me in the next part of exercise 4, more tracking techniques. You've been watching the free version of Mocha Essentials. To download all videos, projects and footage, purchase the premium version available at BorisFX.com.